Having been to China just a few months ago, I have to say the feeling of safety is a humongous difference. And now, of course, all you hardcore bad Americans, I would argue, would immediately start shouting things like, go back to China.
Let me ask you a serious question. If you feel safe in a country where the government can silence you, censor you, or make you disappear, but you feel unsafe in America because a law-abiding citizen might have a gun, are you actually scared of violence or are you scared of freedom? Because those are two very different things.
Our safety. When we were in America, we at least were allowed to carry. Just
having been to China just a few months ago, I have to say the feeling of safety is a humongous difference. And now, of course, all you hardcore bad Americans, I would argue, would immediately start shouting things like, go back to China. Then why are you here? That's not the point of this video. This video is to point blank objectively say that having any old person like me walk into a store and probably being able to come out with guns in any city or state I'm in relatively easily is cause for concern. You don't want any old Joe Schmo walking into a store and grabbing guns, potentially multiple guns, and come out of here. You know, this holiday season, I drove down to North Carolina to visit my family with my husband and my child, and we stopped at Boscov's Mall while we were charging our Tesla. And I shit you not, I literally felt scared. I literally was at the mall being like, anytime, a mass casualty event can and will happen here. Like, any mall in America is not safe. It's just not. Like, the risk is always there. In other countries, the risks are much lower because not everyone has an access to a high power weapon. And at some point, we got to start thinking, why are we doing this to ourselves? Honestly, I really don't get it. I understand there's some people that really like to go hunting, but like, can you just imagine a society where like nobody can really access high powered rifles and shit, and that you could just go into a mall and never have to worry about being shot at? That's a real privilege.
All right, so what you just watched wasn't an argument. It was anxiety with a passport. I went to China and I felt safe. I went to a mall in America and I felt safe. That's not evidence. That's emotion. And emotion is a terrible foundation for law because feeling safe and being safe are not the same thing. In China, danger doesn't announce itself. It doesn't trend. It doesn't get debated. It gets handled quietly by the state and you're not invited to the conversation. And then there's the idea that any old person can just walk into a store and come out with guns. No, that's not how this works. You don't just walk into a gun store like it's a Starbucks and order an AR-15 off of the menu. We have background checks. There are laws. There are qualifiers, disqualifiers. There are penalties. But none of that matters if your entire worldview is built on one false assumption, that criminals obey rules. They don't. So what's really being argued here isn't safety, it's control. Because control feels like safety, and that's where this conversation actually starts. You hear people say all the time, just call the police. But the truth is, police are minutes away when seconds matter. And that's why I created the I'm the Militia design at my shop, shop.mrcolionnoir.com. Because the militia was never the government. It was ordinary people capable of defending themselves, their families, and their communities. If that idea resonates with you, you can grab a hat, shirt, hoodie, drinkware right now at shop.mrcolionnoir.com. I'm gonna put a link in the description section of the video for you to check out. Here's the part of the conversation that always gets skipped, not because it's complicated, but because it's inconvenient. When someone says, I felt safer in China, what they're really saying is, I didn't see violence, so it must not exist. But violence doesn't disappear just because guns do. It adapts. Let me show you.
People love to say America is so dangerous with all of these shootings. You don't see this happening in other countries because they don't have guns like we do. And then they'll add, even if there is violence, the death toll isn't nearly as high. Well, this just happened in China.
Let's take you to China. At least 35 people have been killed in a car ramming incident in the south of the country. A car broke through a barrier and ploughed into people exercising outside a sports centre in Zhohai, which is in Guangdong province.
Same outcome, just a different tool. No one called for car bans. No one blamed the manufacturer. No one said we need high capacity vehicle restrictions. Why? Because when guns aren't involved, we're suddenly capable of understanding intent.
Where's the international outrage? Where are the calls to restrict or ban cars. Instead, we see the Chinese government, as all oppressive governments do best, controlling the narrative. The reporter even describes how officials organize locals to keep journalists away from the scene. That's not the kind of freedom we take for granted here in America, where the press can cover these stories openly. When something tragic happens in America, we don't hide it. And we're certainly not preventing the media from covering it.
This is what people confuse with safety. It's not that nothing bad happens, it's that you're not allowed to talk about it. So yes, you might feel safe, but that safety comes at the cost of truth, transparency, and accountability. That's not peace, that is censorship. Now here's where this argument completely collapses, because it's one thing to hear this from me, it's another thing to hear it from someone who actually lived under it themselves.
I am a Chinese immigrant who survived communism, and under Mao, 40 million people were starving to death after he sold communism to them, and 20 million people died, murdered during his Cultural Revolution. So my question to you, David, is that can you guarantee me, a gun owner tonight, our government in the US, in DC, will never become a tyrannical government? Can you guarantee that to me?
That one question is the Second Amendment distilled. Not hunting, not malls, not rifles, history.
There's no way I can ever guarantee that any government will not be tyrannical.
And that's it. Because once you admit tyranny is possible, even hypothetically, you no longer get to argue for complete disarmament. You've conceded the core issue.
It's so weird to me how people like David Hogg, who are born in this country, take their freedom for granted and are so willing to throw it away and depend on the government to keep them safe.
That's the disconnect. People who escape authoritarianism understand why the Second Amendment exists. People who've only known freedom treat it like an inconvenience. Now, let's deal with the lie that always follows. Other countries don't have this problem. They do. They just don't call it the same thing.
China is notorious for their mass stabbings. They've been riddled with them since 2010. Hell, on the day of Sandy Hook shooting, a guy in China stabbed 21 kids. In 2010 alone, there were nearly 10 mass stabbings. In 2014, 33 people were stabbed to death in a mass stabbing, and they injured 105. In 2018, a guy killed 7 students and injured 12 in a mass stabbing.
Same violence, same innocent victims, different weapons. And yet somehow the outrage only exists when the tool is a gun. That tells you everything you need to know.
So here's the big question. Is banning guns really about safety, or is it about control? In a country like China, where people don't have basic freedoms like press or self-defense, only those in power are safe.
That's the question people avoid, because once you ask it honestly, the whole narrative starts to unravel. A disarmed population is easier to manage. A dependent population is easier to control. A fearful population will trade liberty for promises. When someone says, imagine a world where you can go to the mall and never worry, what they're really imagining is a world where someone else is responsible for their safety, and they never have to think about what happens when that system fails. But here's reality. Police can't be everywhere. Governments can't react instantly, and evil doesn't wait for permission. The Second Amendment isn't about violence. It's about refusing to be helpless, whether the threat comes from a criminal or from a government that decides you're expendable. And that's why people who live through real oppression don't joke about this. They warn you, because once freedom is gone, you don't get it back by asking politely.
One thing's for certain and two things are for sure. Politicians and tech giants don't want gun content to be recommended to you. And we're all fighting this culture war together. Now, you can help do your part by liking, commenting, subscribing to the channel, but most importantly, sharing this video with at least one person. Together, we can stop the suppression of our 2A rights. And don't forget to click the link in the description section of this video for the products that I mentioned in this video.